Welcome everyone to today Tuesday Times Roundtable. The title for today is The Future of Immigration, Navigating Change in the Political Landscape. This is a very important topic for our entire country and community, so we encourage you to approach it with an open mind as we dive into the discussion. My name is Janeri Mendoza Farjan, and I am the Senior Program Coordinator at the Office of Global Learning Initiatives. TTR, it is the Office of Global Learning Initiatives flagship discussion series that brings together multiple perspectives on global trends and issues. If you would like to learn more about TTR, you may go to go.fiu.edu/TTR. As a reminder, all students need to sign in order to get credit for today's session. So if you didn't get a chance to do it at the lobby area, scan the QR code and it will take you to the sign-in page. Whether you're here for Global Learning Medallion points or Honors College or whatever brought you to us, we're just happy that you're here. Also, we're going to have a time to engage in today's conversation. So just as a reminder, we ask you to raise your hand. So we have a couple of mics around the room, and we can bring that over to you, and we can catch that for the recording as well. Global Learning Medallion students, TTR is always a one-point activity, so make sure that you do a screenshot of that login page. If you would like to learn more about the opportunities that we have at the office, including the Peace Corps Prep Program, Global Learning Medallion, scholarships and fellowships, visit our website, goglobal.fiu.edu/students, or follow us on Instagram. All right, so honoring Valentine's Day, the Global Learning Board is going to be hosting an event next week, Tuesday. Feel free to RSVP by going to go.fiu.edu/DGL board event. Today's session also connects to a New York Times article. We do this just to continue the discussion. The article could be found at go.fiu.edu/TTR0211. And this is because FIU has a partnership with the New York Times, so everyone with an FIU address has access to the New York Times. Also, today's session connects with SDG number 8. Which is decent work and economic growth by promoting inclusive and sustainable economic growth, as well as full and productive employment for decent work for all. To learn more about this SDG, including the target indicators and also the goal progress, you may go to go.fiu.edu/SDG. All right, and now it is my honor to introduce our speaker for today, Jose de Wit. He's the founder and lead attorney at the De Wit Immigration Law. Jose is a business immigration lawyer and the managing attorney for the De Wit Immigration Law, a Miami-based law firm. He specializes in crafting immigration strategies for U.S. employers to retain essential international talent. Additionally, he assists the foreign entrepreneurs, professionals, and skilled individuals in obtaining visas and green cards as well. Welcome, Jose. Thank you for joining us today.
Okay. Hi, everybody, and thank you for having me. So my name's Jose de Wit. I'm a business immigration attorney, and I'm going to talk today a little bit about the future of immigration and then how to navigate the shifting landscape that we're seeing in this area. We're going to be kind of playing it by ear because the reality is that we really don't know. We really don't know what the future looks like. We really don't know what's happening with the landscape. Besides, it's definitely in the news, but there's changes happening every day, and we're trying to figure it out as we go along. A little bit about me first. I'm an FIU grad. I studied journalism and mass communications here, graduated in 2007, so this is a blast from the past. I hadn't been here in that long, so not a lot has changed, honestly, but I'm happy to be back. And I studied law school at the University of California, Berkeley, and now I own a business immigration law firm, and I've been practicing immigration law for about 8 years now, full-time. I'm originally from Guatemala. I was born and raised there. I first came to the U.S. when I was 18 to study here at FIU, and then I've been here since. So it's been 20-some years since I've been here. So I've been through the journey of arriving here as an immigrant and just trying to figure out next step after next step after next step to finish school, find work, and eventually stay here permanently. And so I wanted to ask, so who are all you? I want to get a sense of who's in the audience. Like I said, that this presentation, we're playing it by ear a little bit because there are a lot of things that are changing, and I want to try to focus it as much as possible on what's interesting to each of you. So, how many of you are students? Or easier, how many are not students? Okay. And who are you? In the back, the two non-students.
Okay. Hi, my name is Rola. I'm the assistant director at the Global First Year. So we work with international students. I used to be a DSO, so I know somehow about immigration stuff. Yeah.
And hello, everybody. My name is Grant Cutler. I am the academic operations director for Global First Year. So just very interesting. We have about close to 600 first semester international students in our program.
Great. And then as far as the students, how many of you are international students? Raise your hands. So a couple. Okay. So we'll talk about a few different things. First, just kind of an overview of some of the changes to anybody who's kept up in the news. From day one, the Trump administration made huge changes in immigration as promised during that campaign. These affect millions of people, and especially here in South Florida, obviously. So some of the more noteworthy changes have been suspending several humanitarian programs that large numbers of the South Florida population rely on. For example, nationals of Venezuela, Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Ukraine, among others. There's been increased immigration enforcement efforts, so efforts to pick up, arrest immigrants and detain them and deport them. There is an attempt at challenging birthright citizenship, which is constitutionally, if a person is born in the U.S., with very few exceptions, they are born U.S. citizens. And President Trump has, at least by executive order, said that he wants to make that not the case. There already are several legal challenges to this, and I think most legal observers think it's not going to become law ever. But right now we're kind of waiting and seeing. And something that's very new and controversial is involving the military in enforcing the immigration laws. This has been a civilian function historically, and so bringing military presence to the border, and that's completely new in immigration law. Because my focus is business immigration, I want to talk a little bit about what does this mean for foreign employees and for foreign employers. So just from practical experience, what we're seeing right now in South Florida are employers who a significant portion of their workforce are immigrants, and people who are longtime employees who've worked for them for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, and they have temporary protected status that's in jeopardy. Temporary protected status is a status that's available to nationals of countries from whose conditions prevent their citizens from returning. Sometimes those are that's due to earthquakes or climatic events, or sometimes it's because of political conditions. And so Venezuela, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Haiti all enjoy TPS right now. One thing that the Trump administration has done is announce that for Venezuelans, he is phasing that out. And so many Venezuelans will lose TPS status starting early April, and the remainder likely by early September. And so employers are panicking because this is a good chunk of their workforce, and so they're trying to figure out, well, can I help these employees, or how do I scramble and hire replacements? And then for job seekers, well, again, so some of these some countries that have enjoyed temporary protected status, for example, have enjoyed it for decades, some since the early 2000s, and so people who started a life here, built a life here, have children who are now adults, and this is the life they know, is just working with a work permit enabled by temporary protected status, and that's might no longer be here for very long. Already starting, even though none of these measures are in effect yet. Nobody has lost temporary protected status yet. We're already seeing kind of effects in the job market and in the economy. So other than that, TBD. That's as much as I can say right now, because most of the policies that the Trump administration has announced have been directed at individuals who are here without any kind of lawful immigration status, or people who are here under TPS or other humanitarian programs that are temporary. There have been no explicit measures taken against legal. You have a question?
So my question is that those people who've been here for that long on TPS, is there a way for them to apply for residency or any other kind of, because they've been here for so long, like normally if you're here at least 5 years, I think you can apply for permanent residency, or it doesn't apply if you're on TPS?
So sometimes yes, sometimes no. It becomes very complicated because for the most part, when TPS is announced for a country, it's available to nationals of that country who are present in the U.S. at that time. So people who come after TPS is announced don't have it. This means that a large majority of people who get TPS have been here, often unlawfully, for some time. And for most types of immigration applications, one requirement is to have maintained a legal status the whole time you've been here. So now they have TPS, they're here legally, they can work legally, they can even request travel permits that allow them to travel internationally, but because there was a lapse in their immigration status prior to TPS, options are limited, frankly. It's not impossible, but it's a very individualized analysis, and it really depends on the person's situation. And whether also the options they have available to them are based on employment or family or some humanitarian program. There's really case by case. So first, taking a step back, I wanted to give kind of an overview of the lay of the land. What are the requirements for anybody who's here from a different country in the U.S. to be here legally? So foreign nationals who are in the U.S. Need authorization to be present in the U.S. and live here, need authorization to study in the U.S., and need authorization to work in the U.S. And so there's a few ways to have these types of authorizations. One is with a visa. Visa is a temporary authorization that allows the person to be present in the U.S. and to do one or more of those things, so study, work, or participate in other activities. Green cards are permanent residents, so people who have a green card, they're allowed to live here and work here and study here, and they're allowed to do that permanently unless something happens that jeopardizes that status, like committing a crime, certain other infractions. But for the most part, it's permanent. And then some types of immigration situations that are not visas, that are not green cards, allow a person to separately request work authorization as a benefit. And so this can include applicants of certain benefits. So for example, people who are applying for asylum, people who are applying for a green card and are waiting for a decision on that green card, they can request a work permit, and that work permit allows them to study and work in the U.S. while they wait for a decision. People who have TPS status, for example, or who entered through a humanitarian parole program have the opportunity to request a work permit that, even though having TPS doesn't allow you to work, you can request the work permit, and that does. And kind of going back to your question about TPS holders and what they can do, once somebody loses valid immigration status, once they're here, it's typically very hard to recover. There are some exceptions for example, relatives of U.S. citizens. There are some exceptions for beneficiaries of certain humanitarian programs. But by and large, it's very, very difficult to recover immigration status if you haven't maintained it continuously the whole time you've been here. And so that's just kind of the backdrop of to what we're discussing here. These are some of the more common programs that are available for people to obtain immigration status in the U.S. And one is family-based green cards. The relatives of certain relatives of citizens and green card holders are entitled to green cards. And so A citizen can sponsor a parent, a spouse, a child for a green card. A resident can only sponsor, and then a sibling as well. Residents can sponsor their spouses and their kids. And again, the person they're sponsoring can request a work permit to work while they're waiting for a decision. Humanitarian programs, we mentioned TPS. There's also DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. This is an old program that was established under the Obama administration. Its future is unclear, to say the least. At this time, and it's for minors who arrived very, very early in childhood and who meet certain requirements, like not having committed crimes, and having studied and being employed. There are several legal challenges against the DACA program that are playing out right now. As of today, DACA holders can continue to renew their DACA status, but the program is not accepting new applications. That's on hold. This is the next step. This is going to the Supreme Court, and depending on what the Supreme Court says, that'll determine the survival of the DACA program. I think most people who have watched this closely assume that the Supreme Court probably will end DACA, but it's unclear. And then asylum. Asylum is a permanent status that's available to nationals of foreign countries who are in the U.S. and they're afraid to return home. They're afraid to return home because they'll be persecuted, so they'll either be killed or encounter severe harm due to some kind of immutable condition. So there's some of those immutable conditions that are set out in the law. So for example, nationality is one, race is another, religion. But it can also, and there's also certain other types of traits that the law recognizes can't be changed at will. For example, like sexual orientation, for example.
I was going to ask you about gender sexual.
I'm sorry?
It's also gender as well.
Are any of a person's quality traits won't work for asylum? Like it's like hard to really tell.
So, for asylum, there are a few categories of traits that are by default protected under asylum. Gender is not one of them, and sexual orientation is not. But there's a concept it's called a particular social group, and it's if society in the person's home country recognizes this group of people as a distinct population and that's deserving of mistreatment. So sexual orientation commonly is. There's many countries that straight out outlaw different types of non-straight behavior, and even in other places where it's legal, it's typical for law enforcement to target queer individuals. It's common for members of society to target people who are gay, and even though the government's not actively involved, they acquiesce to it. So indirectly, gender and sexual orientation can sometimes be protected, but it depends on the circumstances. And so once a person's asylum application is adjudicated and the person receives asylum, they're entitled to work. But then while a person's waiting for a decision on their asylum application, they can request a work permit. And currently there's a backlog that's anywhere from 6 to 10 years to receive to be scheduled for an interview on your asylum application. So there's a huge population, probably millions of people in the U.S. who are right now allowed to live in the U.S. and work in the U.S. while they eventually are scheduled for an asylum interview.
With Trump's plans to suspend and abolish asylum for those who seek it, what happens to the status of refugees fleeing from countries such as Afghanistan, Palestine, and Somalia, where the likelihoods of coming back are bleak, if any?
So, a couple things. A president can't abolish asylum outright because it's set out in statute. Congress would need to do that. Right, but there are administrative policies that that Trump's administration can and already has started to kind of limit access to asylum. For example, at the border, under the Biden administration, it was possible there was an app, and people who were requesting asylum at the border would use this app to essentially put themselves in line and start their asylum process even before they entered the U.S. And so day one, the Trump administration says, nope, we're not, the app is shut down. Different things like that. You mentioned refugees, and they're actually two separate things. Refugees it's similar to asylum. Asylum is for people who are already here and don't want to go back. Refugees are people who are in countries and they're in serious danger. And so it's almost like pre-asylum is an easy way to think about it, because it's based on the same types of harm a person can suffer, but the U.S. government assesses the danger you're in before you come in, and then you already come in with the status already in place. That the Trump administration also has limited significantly. I don't know how that's going to play out in terms of real-world consequences. We're only a few weeks into the administration, but we can expect that it's going to be almost impossible for refugees to come in as refugees going forward, including in countries like the ones you mentioned.
Thank you.
And so outside of work visas and work-related green cards, these are, what you see here, these are basically some of the main ways that a person can be here in the U.S. And obtain work authorization. So as far as student goes, and I'm not going to get into too much detail here because, and I would encourage you to talk to the International Student Services Office and get more information about these programs, because the government gives universities a lot of discretion in how they implement them. So the rules are a little bit different, even university to university. But generally speaking, a student visa doesn't give you authorization to work. As a student, you're usually authorized only to study. But students are authorized to seek a work permit or work authorization to work in certain types of jobs. And usually, so during your course of studies, there's CPT, and this is practical. This is employment in a job that's related to your program, and usually it has to be tied to like a credit earning class, among other requirements. And then optional practical training, which is after you graduate. Usually, you can use OPT while you're studying, but most students use it afterwards. So you graduate and you have 1 year to work in a job that's related again to your studies, to get practical training in your profession. This is usually for 1 year, and then STEM students can secure extensions for up to 2 years. Did you have a question?
Yes. I work at ISSS, which is International Student Services. The previous conversation, I have these two questions are from students at ISSS. If they had a TPS, if they apply for asylum, then the TPS came, they closed the asylum administrative, and they apply for TPS. They were, active for a year. And last year in March, their TPS expired, and they never renew it. But they had the work permit. They have an asylum which is closed, administrative. The lawyer told them you can open it whenever you want. But what happened between last March and now, when they said the TPS will end? Are they illegal? Can they open the asylum and then that almost year it's wipe out? Oh,
it sounds like probably not. It's hard to say without looking at the documentation behind all of this, but it sounds like not, because if the asylum application is on hold. But I don't know.
Okay.
I would have to see the language of when it was administratively closed, because and whether it was administratively closed in court or at the agency at USCIS. It depends on a bunch of different factors. So I wouldn't want to say yes, no, but it illustrates how complex the situation is, because again, TPS benefits individuals who are in the U.S. when it's announced, and so Some people, they just entered on a student visa, a tourist visa. They're still in status and they switch to TPS and it's very clean. Others have been here unlawfully for a long time, or they filed for asylum, and the results vary depending on whether the asylum is still moving forward, whether it's administratively closed, whether it's been approved, whether it's been denied, whether it's been sent to an immigration court. The person might have a deportation, or there's so many different, it's, like a branching decisions that could affect the situation. So it's how this would affect any one individual or any one student is requires kind of careful analysis, really.
Okay, thank you.
Question, since you mentioned entering under F1 and then getting the TPS.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen this a lot, students relinquishing their F1 to stay on the TPS, and now, especially with the Venezuelan, like now the TPS is going to get removed. So is it easy to go back to F1, like reapplying everything, or
there's a lot of it depends there as well, because so TPS and F1 are not necessarily mutually exclusive. So some people who are here on F1, they applied for TPS and they kept the F1 status intact. But then, and so in theory, they lose TPS. They're still in F1 status. If they're still enrolled in full-time in classes, etc., they don't need to do anything additional to. Some that, if they relinquished it, maybe. And so I guess it depends, because if they were still F1 while they had TPS and they got the TPS work permit and they worked on it, a very strict interpretation of the employment rules means that they violated their student status, because as students they're not allowed to work unless through CPT or OPT. That's a very strict interpretation, and so so from my side of it, as attorneys, our job is to be advocates for the clients, and so immigration laws are notoriously complicated. Immigration laws and tax laws are probably on par as the most complex bodies of law there are in the U.S., because they're defined by all these layers of, there's statute defined by Congress, and then there's regulations that are formally implemented through a very long process by the agencies, and then there's the agencies. There's a bunch of agencies involved. So there's USCIS, there's the Department of State, which issues the visas. There's ICE, which enforces deportation and other kinds of violations, right? And so on. And the Department of Labor is involved also in some of the visa processes. So there's all these agencies. They have formal and informal rules. Sometimes they're in conflict with each other even. And then there's even more. There's things like, for example, handbooks they provide school officers, and handbooks that they provide HR departments, and those have the interplay between those is also complicated. And then there's immigration courts, which are administrative and part of the executive branch, and Article 3 courts, which are courts, which are not, and they also have different interpretations, and they affect it. So that's why there's all these it depends, and it's so infuriating, right? But yes. So in a situation like that, we would probably argue that no, they did not violate student status. They were working on their TPS work permit, but yeah, they might have, right? If they relinquished it, maybe not. Maybe they're okay. And then as far as getting back to TPS, back to F1 from TPS, who's to say? Most visas require an intent to be here temporarily and then go home. And some visas are more sensitive to that than others. Tourist visas and student visas are the most sensitive to an intent to be here permanently. And so will USCIS see having requested TPS as a statement that you want to be here forever? Maybe, maybe not. That's still TBD, but that could be a roadblock. I still wouldn't hesitate to try to get that person back on F1, though. It's worth a shot, because the alternative is being out of status.
Sorry, just on that note, maybe it's a silly question, but as international students, we do have to prove that there's no immigration purpose and that ties to home country, and then we have to go home. But then I don't know, maybe it's a silly question, but then why don't they let us travel? Like oftentimes, like we can't go home, see our families because, we're afraid they might not let us back in. If, for example, I was on a J1, switched to F1, it's not in my passport, and, I would have to reapply. But then how can I prove that I want to, like I don't want to immigrate forever if they don't let me travel or go home? Same with like if you marry a U.S. citizen, you apply for a travel permit, and until like why can't you just leave? Like what's the logic behind it? Why can't you visit your home country if it's not one of the country of concerns?
Oh, what is the logic behind it? Like you saw that there's so many different actors involved in defining the rules. There's Congress, there's the president and the executive branch, there's the courts, two different types of courts, and all these different agencies. And so what's the logic? You'd have to ask. I don't even know who to ask, right? So sometimes the laws just don't make sense. Sometimes they say, well, the policy is this, but then they're requiring you to do that, which is the opposite, and just kind of here along for the ride. I want to go through some of the more common visas and green cards that are available to people who, based on employment and based on profession, because, and so for students, probably this is the most relevant. The H-1B visa is the pipeline into the workforce for F1 students who are graduating. Even the timing of the H-1B visa process is geared toward graduates who are graduating in the traditional school cycle of graduating in the spring. And what the H-1B visa is, very broadly, it requires a job offer in an occupation that can only be performed by somebody with a degree in one or very few specialized fields. So, like very easy examples are an architect. You will very rarely find an architect who didn't study architecture, or an engineer who didn't study engineering. There might not be an exact one-to-one match, but for example, software developer, somebody who's hiring for a software developer position might require a degree, an applicant with a degree in computer science or software engineering, or one or two other fields in a very, very small pool of options. So that's, in summary, the basic requirement for an H-1B visa. And what an H-1B visa gives you is 3 years to live and work in the U.S. for the employer that sponsored you, and it can be extended for an additional 6 years. And it's compatible with green card processes. So for people who stay here permanently, very often the path is coming here as an F1 student, switching over to H-1B, and then pursuing a green card in the meantime. One big catch to the H-1B program is that there's a lot more demand than there is supply. About 30%. So the visas are distributed by lottery, and the lottery takes place once a year in March. And depending on whether you have a master's degree or a bachelor's degree, your chances are probably around 30-ish%. If you are either from Chile, Singapore, or Australia, then you're in luck, because there are two types of visas, the E3 and the H-1B one, that are very, very similar to the H-1B visa. They require essentially the same thing. The benefits are a little bit different, but there's no lottery. So you're fortunate if you're from one of these countries. A couple of alternatives. If you're Mexican, you also have access to another employment-based visa called the TN visa, if you're Canadian as well. This is based on the NAFTA treaty. So if you're from one of these countries and your degree and your job offer is in one of a list of occupations that are set out in this treaty, then you can apply for a TN visa. And a TN visa gives you 3 or 4 years of status depending on your nationality, and there's no lottery. The application process is very fast-tracked. Canadians can apply for this even at the airport. They can be in Canada, arrive to the airport a few hours before their flight, and there are U.S. immigration officers there who review and apply their application on the spot. Mexicans can go straight to a U.S. consulate and go through a process that's similar to the F1 visa application process. One catch to this one is that there's a list of occupations that qualify, and if you're not on the list, then you're out of luck. And another is green cards through labor certification. These are difficult to time for most students because the process takes about 3 years. They're incredibly flexible. Basically, it requires a job offer and a candidate who meets the requirements for that job offer, and they can be used to sponsor anything from unskilled labor, like a landscaper, for example, to a rocket scientist, as long as you meet the requirements for the job. But it takes about 2 to 3 years. So for a student to benefit from this, they would need to have a relationship with an employer who can sponsor them basically throughout most of their time here while they're studying.
So can they apply, for example, if an international student graduates, apply for OPT, which is 1 year employment, and then while he or she is on OPT, the company can sponsor them with an H-1B, and while the H-1B, they can apply for labor certificate, right?
Exactly. So that's the most common pipeline from international student to permanent resident is F1, OPT, then H-1B, and then the labor certification. In some cases, it can, for example, a STEM student who has 3 years of OPT, if they, for example, use their CPT to have an internship with an employer, they have a really good match, and that employer is willing to go to bat from them even before they graduate, it might be possible to get through the entire labor certification process before their STEM authorization runs out, for instance. So it can be useful to some students, but it's the use cases for current students are a lot narrower. And then a couple of more out-of-the-box options, for example. One is the O1 visa. It's an extraordinary ability visa. What it requires is essentially that you have skills, accomplishments, a professional trajectory that establishes you as significantly better than average, I guess, compared to your peers, more advanced. This is limited for many current students because you need to show a portfolio of your work, for lack of a better word. Immigration has defined categories of accomplishments that they consider valid to document your talent for this visa. Some of them are awards, endorsements from experts in your field, that you've published academic papers, for instance, that you have job offers or have been paid salaries that are significantly above the norm, that basically just by how much money you've been paid, that by itself establishes you as a superstar. Or that you have held or will hold high-profile jobs for high-profile employers or clients. Still, it's not unheard of for students. So a couple of examples that our firm has handled recently. We had a vocational student at an art school in Orlando, and the kid's 21. He's young. He's so young, but when he was 16, he was still in high school. He was already working with an animation studio that does work for a lot of very high-profile Latin music artists for their music videos. And so even though he hasn't finished his 2-year vocational program, he already has job offers from big record labels, from a lot of very well-established production companies. And so because he started so young and he's so talented, then he's able to do this. And there's no lottery for this, and there's a direct path to a green card afterward. Another alternative, so for more advanced students, master's students, PhD students, who, especially if they've had a career before and then went back to school, they might have enough of a trajectory to dominate. So we just did one of these for an MIT graduate who he's published a lot of work as a PhD student. Before that, he worked for an urban planning company that and was responsible for projects in really like designing traffic control structures for in big cities in India, and these were very high-profile projects, and so he was able to qualify.
So if a person would want to apply to this from abroad, not already living here, would he have to talk to a U.S. immigration attorney, and then he would be like, no, you're not good enough, or he would suggest that, yeah, you could maybe try and apply to this? Yeah, like, would a lawyer be able to tell if he has a chance or not? Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. You would talk to I think that would probably be the easiest way to go about it, is speak to an immigration attorney and go through the list of accomplishments that are considered valid for one of these visas depends on whether your occupation is in business, arts, sciences, or education, or if your profession can be described as an occupation in the arts, which is they're different requirements, and it's also a lot easier to get. So we've used that situation for a lot of marketing professionals, for example, where they do marketing work that is very visual or that requires a lot of writing, and we just couch it as a creative job, and so that makes this visa a lot more accessible for them. But yeah, the place to start is to go talk to an attorney and go through your portfolio of work and seeing if we can present some of your accomplishments in the way that immigration wants to see them. And another is, which also won't be accessible to all students, but it's an interesting option, is an E2 investor visa. And we actually used this recently for an FIU grad. And this requires, so this is only one limitation, it's only available to nationals of certain countries. There's a list of countries. If you're on the list, then you meet that first requirement. And essentially, if you invest what's called a substantial amount of money into starting your own business or acquiring a business, then you're allowed to be here in the U.S. to run that business. The way that this becomes accessible for some students is that what substantial means varies according to the context. So it's not $1 million. It's not substantial means to immigration. It means enough for the applicant to have skin in the game, to be committed to the project, and that, if I invest $50 into a project and it doesn't work out, well, I lost $50. But if I invested an amount that for me was difficult to secure, then I'm going to stick with it until it either succeeds or just fails completely. And the other is that it has to be appropriate to the type of business. So, sure, if you tell me I want to start a manufacturing business or a business with a lot of inventory, then you probably need a ton of money to make that business viable. They want to see a business that's viable. But if you have a business that if you're in a career where you can work as a consultant, for example, it doesn't take a whole lot of money to set up a consulting business. You need a laptop, some software licenses, so you can actually put together a viable business plan for a viable business and do this. So we did this for a recent FIU grad, and he was really into video games, really into video games. And what he ended up doing is gathering funds from friends, from family. He borrowed a little bit and came up with enough to start a business. He video game console wholesaler. And he didn't start with very much money, but he didn't qualify for a talent visa. He didn't get into the H-1B lottery. He's all out of options. He was able to collect enough money to scrape together a viable E2 company, and here he is. So it's an option for some students, and it's worth considering because all of them have catches and limitations. So it's worth looking at the whole landscape. So what's new under Trump? So back to this. Again, most of the changes that have been announced so far have focused on humanitarian programs. And so if you're here or if on a humanitarian program, if you are an employer and work with people who are on humanitarian programs, this affects you directly, but otherwise not necessarily. If you're an F1 student, for example. We talked about TPS and we talked about the parole program. These are two of the programs that have been suspended. I just wanted to talk briefly about what are some strategies that could be useful for students who are either on a humanitarian program and that is ending, or for F1 students who are planning out the rest of their trajectory here on campus and then afterward. Because, as I mentioned, there's no explicit changes to immigration policy. We think it's going to be harder to get most types of visa applications approved going forward just because of what we saw from the previous Trump administration. That may not pan out. There's all these tech people who are in the Trump administration now, Elon Musk and others, and their businesses rely on H-1B visas, and so that might exert some influence. But for now, we're just bracing for the worst and just anticipating that getting an H-1B visa, getting an O-1 visa, getting any of the visas we mentioned is going to be an uphill battle now versus before. And so if I were a student here at FIU, I remember when I was a student, I didn't really think through any of this, really. Like, I just got through the process by kind of momentum. And I never really thought about, like, like, for example, was my major going to be appropriate for an H-1B visa process if I wanted to graduate and work here? I didn't really even, I just kind of assumed I'm going to graduate, I'm going to find a job, and I can work. I didn't really think through all of this. And so the number one thing I would tell students is to really start planning early. Even like if you're a freshman, start planning now, because there are decisions that you can make right now that will be relevant to whether you can stay here and work here and live here after you graduate, if that is your plan. So for example, selecting a major, or even if you have a major that by itself is not appropriate for H-1B, but selecting like a concentration or a minor or some other, some kind of specialty area within your field of study that is specialized enough to qualify you for an H-1B visa. We talked a little bit about CPT and OPT, the programs that are available for F1 students to work. And one thing I also didn't do when I was here as a student, but I think is good advice now, is to use those really strategically and think about them as tryouts with potential visa sponsors. So not use your CPT to do any internship, but with an internship, like ask these questions when you're interviewing. Like do you sponsor people for visas? Because otherwise, you might want to look for opportunities with employers that would be willing to do that, so that you can use your time with them to really impress them and really set the stage for visa sponsorship once you graduate. Another is just talk to people, talk to International Student Services, talk to attorneys like me, talk to anybody who can give you information about options, because we talked about a handful of common visa options for students and recent grads. Those are not all the options. There are more, right? And especially because we just entered into an era with a very anti-immigration administration, it's good to have a plan A, but also a plan B and a plan C and a plan D. And the sooner you start mapping that out, the more options you'll have as you approach graduation and start looking for jobs. And then last thing about the humanitarian programs, if you are a DACA student or know any DACA students, the best thing you can do is lobby your lawmakers. President Trump himself and then a lot of local representatives campaigned on saving dreamers and leaving options for dreamers. And they were very vocal about that, and that won them votes. So hold them to that. Lobby your lawmakers, make sure everybody you know and love lobbies your lawmakers, and have them go to bat for you and push for options that will protect you if the Supreme Court ends up ruling against DACA. Any other questions?
If there's a choice for them to be go through the civilization process to actually become citizens, is that a better way to stay here if they want to, or would that be a last resort for some?
To go through which process?
Become a citizen.
Well, if somebody already has a green card and then they are eligible to become a citizen, then absolutely.
Okay, TPS.
Okay.
I know everything is uncertain, we have to wait and everything, but that's every day I get a phone call or VO with questions. TPS, do you think, what's your thought? Is this going to be extended? I understand that right now the administration is checking every single TPS and, investigating who has those TPS that are criminals, that are, bad people, and then those are going to be removed. But what about the good ones? What do you think? Do you think they're going to give a little extension? Or what happened if the 7th of April comes? And what's going to happen to all those people? How are they going to
As it
What do you
stands,
think?
so as it stands right now, TPS, Venezuelan TPS holders whose TPS runs out April 7th, it runs out April 7th, and that's
Do they have like
unless they switch to some other status, they're out of status. I'll
do
tell
they
you,
have like a grace period where they have to go, or the 7 they have to be out of here?
there's no grace period, not for TPS. So if you want to look at it hopefully, during the first Trump administration, there were attempts to get rid of TPS for countries that have had it for a really, really, really long time. El Salvador, Honduras, and there promptly were lawsuits, and that stalled the process. And anyway, they managed to keep, people who pushed back against that managed to keep it alive, and here we are, and Salvadorians and Hondurans still have TPS status. Maybe that will happen with Venezuela. I'm not aware of any lawsuits that have been filed. I hope so. I hope so that when these lawsuits are filed, often people filing the lawsuits ask the courts for an injunction, keeping TPS in place until the court makes a final decision. So that, might push it out a little bit longer. But I think if someone's here on TPS, especially on the TPS that runs out April 7th, they should be acting as if it's going to run out on April 7th. And so, for example, we're speaking with a lot of employers who are trying to find solutions for their workforce who has TPS, and any of them who qualify for H-1B because they have. So we're telling them to put them in the March H-1B lottery. In previous years, we've had H-1B results last week of March, and that leaves a couple of weeks to put together an H-1B petition and file it before TPS ends. And from there, will that work? It depends on, did they file an asylum application before? Did they have unlawful presence before? Case by case, but at least it's something. Whatever it is, it's going to be a tightrope act, really. It's going to be just this tightrope act where one change can kind of just end it all. So.
Hi. In regards to the O1 visa, I believe the investor one, would you say that's better for a sole person who's applying for that, or can that cover, say, their family?
It can. So all employment-based visas offer at least the right to live here and study here in the U.S. to their spouses. Some, like the investor visa, for example, that allows spouses to also work. So it's something to consider.
Quick question about the investor visa. I thought, I read somewhere that it was 800,000 minimum to invest. Is that because you said that it's not necessarily the case?
Yeah. So most investment and employment-based visas have think about it as like an older brother version. It's like a green card version, and so it's like a junior version with much easier requirements. And so for some, like the talent visa, the O1 visa, the step up from the talent visa to the green card it's a step up, but it's not a leap necessarily for a lot of people. In the investment realm, it can be huge. Like you can have a viable investment visa for 5 figures, for example. For an investment-based green card, it's 800,000 or $1 million plus, depending on where the job is located. So that's the difference. I wanted to say, so if you have more questions and if you want to talk more, we usually charge for consultations, but for those in attendance here, if you want to talk more, you can use this QR code and book a 15-minute call, and we can go through your individual situation and figure out what makes sense for you. We mostly focus on business immigration, but if you're here on DACA, if you're an asylum applicant and have an asylum-based work permit, if you're a TPS holder, my colleague, the information for our colleague who can help with that and who also has offered to speak to FIU students for free is on the previous slide, so you can download the presentation and find her contact information there, and just tell her that you got her contact from this presentation, and she'll help you out. Thank you.
Jose. Really was an honor to have you here with us today and creating so much awareness on this such an important topic that we talk about every day. Thank you for doing this for us, and then we hope that you definitely reach out to Jose and his team for any upcoming questions that you may have on immigration status and so on. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.